The Altair 8800 is a microcomputer designed in 1974 by MITS, which stands for Micro Instrumentation and Telemetry Systems. They were an American electronics company founded in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So they built this Altair 8800, and it was based on the Intel 8080 CPU. Interest grew quickly after it was featured on the cover of the January 1975 issue of Popular Electronics and was sold by mail order through advertisements there in Radio Electronics and in other hobbyist magazines. The Altair is widely recognized as the spark that ignited the microcomputer revolution. Interesting. So again, this is 1974. The computer bus designed for the Altair was to become a de facto standard in the form of the S100 bus, and the first programming language for the machine was Microsoft's founding product, Altair Basic. The typical MITS product had a generic name like the Model 1440 calculator or the Model 1600 digital voltmeter. Ed Roberts was busy finishing the design and left the naming of the computer to the editors of Popular Electronics. One explanation of the Altair name, which editor Les Solomon later told the audience at the first Altair Computer Convention in March 1976, is that the name was inspired by Lee's 12-year-old daughter, Lauren. She said, "Why don't you call it Altair? That's where the Enterprise is going tonight." The Star Trek episode is probably Amok Time, as this is the only one from the original series which takes the Enterprise crew to Altair 6. Another explanation is that the Altair was originally going to be named the PE-8 for Popular Electronics 8-bit, but Les Solomon thought this name to be rather dull, so Les Alexander Burra, okay, I've spelled the last name here correctly. He was the associate editor. So that guy and John McAvey, technical editor, decided that it's a stellar event, so let's name it after a star. Now, Intel made the Intellec 8 microprocessor development system that typically sold for a very profitable $10,000. It was functionally similar to the Altair 8800, but it was a commercial-grade system with a wide selection of peripherals and development software. Customers would ask Intel why their Intellec 8 was so expensive when that Altair was only $400. Some salesmen said that MITS was getting cosmetic rejects or otherwise inferior chips. For a decade, colleges had required science and engineering majors to take a course in computer programming, typically using the Fortran or BASIC languages. This meant there was a sizable customer base who knew about computers. In 1970, electronic calculators were not seen outside of a laboratory, but by 1974 they were a common household item. Calculators in video games like Pong introduced computer power to the general public. MITS had no competition in the US for the first half of 1975. Their 4K memory board used dynamic RAM and it had several design problems. The delay in shipping optional boards and the problems with the 4K memory board created an opportunity for outside suppliers. An enterprising Altair owner, Robert Marsh, designed a 4K static memory that was plug-in compatible with the Altair 8800 and sold for $255. His company was Processor Technology, one of the most successful Altair-compatible board suppliers. In 1977, Pertec Computer Corporation purchased MITS and began to market the computer without changes, except for branding, as the PCC 8800 in 1978. In the first design of the Altair, the parts needed to make a complete match would not fit on a single motherboard, and the machine consisted of 4 boards stacked on top of each other with standoffs. Another problem facing Roberts was that the parts needed to make a truly useful computer were not available or would not be designed in time for the January launch date. So during the construction of the second model, he decided to build most of the machine on removable cards, reducing the motherboard to nothing more than an interconnect between the cards, a backplane. The basic machine consisted of 5 cards, including the CPU on one and memory on another. He then looked for a cheap source of connectors and came across a supply of 100-pin edge connectors. The S100 bus was eventually acknowledged by the professional computer community and adopted as the IEEE 696 computer bus standard. The Altair bus consists of the pins of the Intel 8080 run out onto the black backplane. No particular level of thought went into the design, which led to disasters such as shorting from various power lines of differing voltages being located next to each other. Another oddity was that the system included two unidirectional 8-bit data buses when the normal practice was for a single bidirectional bus. This oddity did, however, allow a later expansion of the S100 standard to 16 bits bidirectional by using both 8-bit buses in parallel. And you got to check out my favorite picture of all of this. And apparently this was the second model, so it's the Altair 8800B. Well, programming the Altair via the front panel could be a tedious and time-consuming process. Programming required the toggling of the switches to positions corresponding to the desired 8080 microprocessor instruction or opcode in binary, then used the deposit next switch to load that instruction into the next address of the machine's memory. This step was repeated until all the opcodes of a presumably complete and correct program were in place. The only output from the programs was the patterns of lights on the panel. Nevertheless, many were sold in this form. Development was already underway on additional cards, including a paper tape reader for storage, additional RAM cards, and an RS-232 interface to connect to a proper teletype terminal. And there's an interesting section in this article that talks about the first game that they ran on this machine, Lunar Lander. And this is, I guess, a whole genre of video games, all being based on the 1969 landing of the Apollo lunar module on the moon. In these games, players generally control a spacecraft as it falls towards the surface of the moon, and they try to use the thrusters to slow down the ship's descent. So that's it for this video. I just wanted to read about the basics of the Altair 8800. Thanks for watching.